and welcome to the Organic Beehive. In today's video, I am going to go over the step-by-step process on how I start my seeds. So I did a poll over on my Instagram stories a few weeks ago, and I asked how many of my audience gardened or didn't garden. A lot of you did. It was such an exciting thing to see. But then when I asked how many of you started your seeds indoors, I got a huge variation between those who did and those who didn't, and I was really surprised. The number one factor that deterred you from starting your seeds was the space. If you can fit a shelf next to an outlet, you have the space. Now, I will say it's not as aesthetically pleasing. So right now, my seeds are sitting in my kitchen, in my empty nook, because I don't know how to decorate it. So it is a bit of an eyesore, but it doesn't really bother me because it'll only be there for a few months and then I'm done with it. If that doesn't bother you, if the aesthetic doesn't bother you, then you can essentially fit it on any wall with an outlet. If you can fit a bookshelf there, you can fit your seeds there as well. Another thing that deterred you was that you don't get enough light. So a lot of people do claim that you should be able to start your seeds next to like a south-facing window. I've tried that. My plants still get really what they call leggy because they grow really fast. They grow tall, not necessarily have the leaves on it, but they'll grow tall and they will start reaching for the sun. That means they're not getting enough. And the solution for that is grow lights. So if that was your reasoning for not starting your seeds indoors, find comfort in knowing that grow lights are gonna fix that. And then I think another thing that stopped a lot of people was the fact that they were afraid. I think what happens in this world of social media, like, it's great. It's a great tool for meeting like-minded people and getting information and learning things, but it can equally be as harmful. So anybody, including me, can essentially create a blog or a website sharing information. Like, I mean, there's makeup bloggers and hair bloggers and home improvement bloggers and homesteading bloggers. And in this instance, if you're following a homestead blogger who has 50 acres and all these animals and a huge garden, you might be comparing yourself to them. And we tend to compare our journey to theirs. And we get so overwhelmed looking at what they're doing that we stop ourselves before we even start. So I just wanted to inspire you and motivate you before we get into this talk that you can absolutely do it. Think about, if you're a mother, think about your daughter or son. And would you ever expect them to do a task that you have done for 20, 30, 40 years as perfect as you? I would like to think that you would have given your children grace in that situation. We need to give ourselves that same grace. Are your kids capable of doing a task? Absolutely. Are they going to do it as well as you? No, because you have many more years of experience than they do. So I want you to give yourself that same grace when it comes to homesteading. And then I think that a lot of people stop themselves, and I hope that you know that I'm speaking generally. If you don't feel this way, great, go for it. But I think a lot of people also stop themselves because they think they have a black thumb. I used to be like that. And when I think back, I have to get really honest with myself. Was I a black thumb because, I couldn't do it? Or did I have a black thumb because I didn't really care? 10, 15 years ago, I might have seen a home decor blog that, decorated with a cute little fiddle leaf tree, and I thought, oh, well, that's super cute, I'm gonna do it. And then I go by a scheduled watering, even though I know nothing about the fiddle leaf tree, and I kill it. I considered myself a black thumb, when in reality, I really didn't do any research, and I didn't care enough to go above and beyond. I just thought it was cute. Now, fast forward 10 or 15 years, as I'm gardening, I just went for it. It was a priority for me to be able to feed my family food from our backyard that was organic. It was guaranteed organic. So that was such a priority for me that I just went for it. And then as problems arise, I researched and figured things out. And that's the same thing that you're going to do as well. So my advice to you is just go for it. And then as you go along your journey, you're going to make mistakes, but you're going to learn from those mistakes. Now keep in mind that these seed starting tips that I'm going to share with you today are very general. Yes, they fit into the mold for many different seeds out there, but remember, all seeds are not created equal. Some seeds need light to germinate. Most seeds don't. Some seeds you actually don't want to start indoors. They are better sown outside. So always consult with your seed packet just to make sure. The first thing you're going to do when starting your seeds is to gather your supplies. My last video shared all the supplies that you're going to need, and I will add a card right here for you, as well as I created a blog post. So if you don't have time to go through it, you can look through the blog post, and I mention all of the supplies that you'll need, and I'll link that in the description below. Once you've gathered all your supplies, you're ready. Congratulations. Follow along with this video and let's do this together. So you've got your seed supplies. Number 2, what you're going to want to do is consult your seed packet. A couple things that I check on my seed packet before I start the seeds. And number 1 is, how soon in advance do you want to start your seeds before your last frost date? This is huge. Some seeds require 8 to 12 weeks, like peppers. Some require 6 to 8 weeks before your last frost date. Some require 4 to 6 weeks, 2 to 4 weeks. They're all different. So you're going to want to narrow down and see what you need to plant right now. And then of course, the biggest thing you're going to want to make sure is on the seed packet, it will give you a recommendation on whether you should sow your seeds directly outdoors where they're going to stay, or if it's recommended for the seeds to be started indoors. Perfect example of vegetables that actually need to be started outside would be root vegetables. If you start those seeds indoors and then transplant them out into your garden, that will hugely disturb those roots, and that's where the essence of that vegetable is, your carrot or your radish. So double checking your seed packet to make sure that it is in fact recommended that you start them inside is something important to look at. Now, number 3 kind of correlates with number 2. As I said, your seed packets are going to tell you when you need to start your seeds. And it can be really confusing on figuring out what seeds to start when. So what I like to do, and I learned this from Jill Winger, she has a great homesteading account. She prints out a really simple year at a glance calendar. and I posted that in the blog house, just a recommendation, but you can easily Google Year at a Glance 2022 calendar and find one that fits your style. So that's what I did. I printed out a Year at a Glance calendar. I marked my last frost date and my first frost date. And my biggest tip for you as far as determining that is, for that last frost date, that is merely a suggestion or an average of, all the last frost dates, right? So it's not necessarily set in stone that if the website says that your last frost date is April 17th, that it's not going to happen, because it absolutely can happen. So if you're going to look up your last frost date, I would recommend tacking on 2 weeks to that, just to make sure that frost doesn't happen, because there are in fact some plants that really don't do well with any frost. And I have learned that in the past, that was a big mistake for me. I spent months nurturing my tomatoes, my peppers, my marigold, what else did I do? Basil. And I waited a couple days after the suggested last frost date. It was a beautiful day. I was motivated. I wanted to be outside. I planted those things, and a week later they died from a frost. Now you could probably cover them up. I didn't realize that was coming. It kind of snuck up on us, and they all died. And then I had to get seedlings from the nursery, and I was crushed, because you spend all of that time nurturing those plants just for them to die from a frost. It's frustrating. So just to make sure, find out your last frost date and tack on a couple weeks just to make sure that doesn't happen to you. And then what you're going to do is you're going to get a few different color highlights. I don't know how many you're going to need. It depends on the seeds, but you'd probably want a color for your 8 to 12 week, your 6 to 8, your 4 to 6, and your 2 to 4. So about 4 different colors. And then you're going to highlight each timeline a different color. So you're going to look at your Year at a Glance. Check out what you determined your last frost to be and count back 8 to 12 weeks and highlight all of that in one color. Then you're going to go through, look at your last frost date, count backwards 6 to 8 weeks. Highlight that in a different color. And then you'll do the same. You'll pick a different color for 4 to 6 weeks and 2 to 4 weeks. So now when you look at your calendar in a glance, you know when you should be planting and which plants you should be planting. I tried to make it easy for you. I created a freebie with all the popular produce that you might grow in your garden, and I have labeled which ones are 6 to 8 weeks, 8 to 12, all the things. So you can look at that chart and know exactly what you need to plant. So I created a freebie for that. I'm going to link that in the description below, and you can check that out in my blog post too. Now that we've got all that organization out of the way, number 4 is you're going to want to take your soil and mix it with some water. This is vital. What I usually do is I just take a bucket, like a food grade bucket, or I will just take a big mixing bowl and put my soil in there, add some water, and then mix it. You really want it to be a moist consistency. I know a lot of people hate that word, I do too, but that's really what you want. And a tip that I have is when you are handling the soil is it sticking to your hand? If it's not, it's certainly not wet enough for the seeds to germinate. If you've mixed it and you've seen that your soil is really wet, you can add a little soil, mess with it. I mean, there's no real measurements to it. So just do based on how you feel. If it's not wet enough, it's not the end of the world. There are signs that you can look for later on to determine whether the environment is moist enough for your seeds. After you've mixed the soil and water together, you're going to take your seed containers and shovel the soil into the middle of your seed compartments. And what you're going to do then is kind of just spread it out, smooth it all out among all the containers. An important thing to note is you do not want to pack this in by any means. That's why I just kind of use my hand or shovel just to spread it all out and make sure each container is filled equally. Once your soil is in all of the compartments, now you're ready to label them and put the seeds in. I don't always label my plants, I'm going to be honest, but I've been gardening for quite a few years that I just know what the plant looks like. I know that's an onion, I know that's a pepper, I know that's a tomato. And I also don't have a huge scale garden where I have to keep up with all the different varieties of plants that I have. I just don't. So sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. If you're a beginner gardener, I would recommend you labeling them as you start to become familiar with how each plant looks like. And if you're a real avid gardener, I'm pretty sure you're not watching this video, but if you are an avid gardener and have tons of varieties, then I would recommend for you as well to label them to keep them straight too. But once they're labeled, then you can put your seeds in. You don't need much depth for your seed to go into the soil. So I just put my finger in very lightly to make that indentation, and then I'll put the seeds in. Now, not all seed packets will tell you how many seeds to put into each compartment. And sometimes I get confused. And that has confused me in the past. So I'll go, okay, I'll just put one seed in. Now, that could absolutely work, but you're gonna get a better germination rate if you put 2 or 3 seeds into each compartment. I'm sure there's other theories on how many seeds to put into each compartment, but as far as my advice, take it or leave it, put in a couple seeds just for a better germination rate. If you happen to get 2 to 3 plants in one compartment, that's an easy fix for later on. So what I do is I keep the strongest plant in the compartment, and the 2 smaller ones, the 2 or one smaller one, you will take and you can put into another compartment of its own. I just look at it as an extra bonus if I have extra seeds. Also, if you think that you're gonna have like 4 tomato plants out in your yard, I would start seeds for more than that. I can't say how much because I don't know the size of your garden, but a few extra seeds is just going to give you that insurance policy if something doesn't work out or whatever. That's probably the biggest tip that most gardeners are going to give you, is to plant more than you think. And that's what makes them look so successful. You didn't see how much died behind the scenes. What they had left was what survived, right? We only see the highlight reel. But that is what that is what a lot of gardeners do, is they'll just plant extra. And so When you're ready to plant outside and you see you have all this extra, you can sell them, you can gift them, and you can throw them in the compost. But it's a good problem to have, I promise. Once your seeds are in, I just take a scoop of soil and just kind of sprinkle it on top. Because remember, those seedlings need that airflow. So if you pack that soil in, that does a disservice to the seed. And now you're ready to start your seeds. I mean, all it takes is a few basic ingredients. I think we overthink it and get in our head and think there's so much more to it. But the fact of the matter is that your plants want to survive, and it really takes a lot for them to die. If you give them the right environment, there's no reason why they can't thrive. So you've got your containers, you throw it, not throw it, you put it into your tray, and then you add the lid on top, which will create that greenhouse effect. And that lid is going to be like a compass for you on how you need to treat those seedlings as you move forward, as you're waiting for them to germinate. So let me explain that. You're going to put the lid on. Now, I do recommend a heat mat, but you can look at your lid for a sign as to whether you need that or not. So once I have everything in place, the next day I will look at the lid to see what it's trying to tell me. Is there condensation on it? If there's condensation around the lid, that is a good sign that your soil was nice and moist. And that's exactly what those seeds need. Number 2, is your lid fogging up? Are your seeds getting enough heat for them to be able to germinate? If you don't see that, and also when you open the lid, you should have that like earthy smell to it. I wish there was like a scratch and sniff button on here or something where you could smell my seedlings, but there isn't. But when you smell it, you'll know that it has the right conditions it needs. But those are the 2 things I look for. If there's not a lot of condensation on it, I'll just pour some water into the tray, or I'll spray the plants very So just to reiterate, when I put the next morning, I will look at the lid. If there's not a lot of condensation on it, I will pour a little bit of water into the tray, or with a mini spray bottle, I'll just spray the soil on top and monitor that lid. That condensation helps me know that it is moist enough for those seeds. And then another thing is I check if it's foggy, so I know that it's heated in there. If you're not getting that fog on the lid, that's when I might recommend you get a heat mat. And that's why I say it's optional, because most likely if you are starting your seeds indoors, you're keeping your house, I'm assuming, at a temperature that is ideal for those plants. That heating mat is going to kind of speed up the germination process, but again, you're not really going to know until you see the signs on that lid. And I just continue to monitor that until I see little sprouts come up, and then you know you're doing it right. Now you wait. And this is the hardest part, because this is the time where you're questioning all your abilities on starting these seeds. On the chart that I did create, it also tells you the germination rate for each one, so that you have a good idea on when you should start to see little sprouts. Once they are germinated, congratulations. This is like the first big win for you as a gardener. Once they are germinated, take off the lid and also take them off the heat mat. If you have other seeds still waiting to be germinated, you could probably still keep it on the heat mat, but once they're all sprouted, I would take the heat mat off. It's not going to necessarily hurt it. It's just more like, do you really want to waste your electricity the whole time with the heat mats? Especially if you have a lot of seeds. Once you've taken the lid off and the heat mat, you can put it under some grow lights. Now, the positioning of your grow lights is vital to your plants, and I've made the mistake of just hooking my lights up to the top of my shelf and letting them go. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a term gardeners use where your plants kind of grew really tall really quick, and that's called leggy, and that just means that they are reaching for the sun, and that grow light is not as close as it should be to the plant. So what I do, and what all gardeners recommend, is you want your grow light to be 2 to 4 inches away from your seedlings. So as they grow, as they get taller, you're going to have to adjust your grow light. So I just have a string that I will tighten as it needs to move up as the plants grow. I've seen other people just put boxes underneath. So as you need your plant to get closer to the grow light, they'll just throw boxes underneath. I mean, if you don't want to adjust your grow light, I hope that makes sense. So you can either adjust the grow light, or you can keep your light in one place and just have boxes under it, and as it gets taller, you take a box out, you take a box out. So I hope that makes sense for you. I'd love to know, do you plan on starting seeds this year? Comment below with what you are most excited to start growing with this season. If you'd like to support my channel, be sure to like this video, and if you're new here, subscribe as well to get notified every time that a new video comes out. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.